The health and disease care is something that you need to bring together, and you have to absolutely execute at the same time.
Welcome to the Ultra Healthy Now podcast, where your journey to feeling younger, sexier, and more energized begins. Dr. Nicole Srednicki, who specializes in high-performance health, will dive into practical, actionable tips and strategies that can transform your physical, mental, and emotional well-being. Join us as we uncover the secrets to living a healthier, happier life, mind, body, and spirit. Because true health, beauty, and happiness start on the inside.
Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of Ultra Healthy Now, your weekly podcast where we explore the journey to maximize your health. I'm your host, Dr. Nicole Srednicki, founder of Ultra Healthy Human, where we specialize in high-performance health for high-performance people. Last week, we covered an important topic that probably scares everyone: memory loss. Can I reduce the risks of developing memory loss? The answer is yes. This topic is so important that we've made it a 3-part podcast series, and today is part 2. In part 1, we talked about my patient Liza with her strong family history of Alzheimer's and her determination to beat it and how. Now, if you're young, you may want to stay tuned in because you could pass this information along to your mom, dad, or grandparents. And 2, you can implement some of this into your life now. Remember, start implementing positive lifestyle habits before you develop symptoms or progression towards an illness. So for Liza, we created a process of achieving 4 goals through a 3-step program. Her 4 goals were brain health, reducing inflammation, improving her metabolic function, and setting her up for long-term success. Her 3-step program included labs, so we understand what's going on inside of her body now, lifestyle modifications, and introducing new cutting-edge therapies. Last episode, we covered steps 1 and part of step 2. We discussed diet, inflammation, exercise, and stress. Today, in part 2, we're going to dive a bit deeper into our inner being. If you remember, Liza was determined to beat it, and this requires attention to all levels of her being, not just physical actions, but also mental and spiritual awareness. I remember hearing a story about 2 brothers. They grew up the same household, and later in life, one of them was an active marathon runner, very focused on his health, and the other had a sedentary lifestyle. So during one of the marathons, the brother that was really healthy, he had a heart attack. The sedentary brother didn't have a heart attack. So this brought the question, why did this happen to the one that seemed to be doing everything right? I sometimes have patients that come to me saying this, that they feel like they've done everything their doctor says, but they're still failing. So they did all of these required steps to try to work towards health. So maybe it's brain fog, weight loss, or even cardiac health, but why did they fail? And this brings us to our inner being. Today, here with us to discuss this aspect that could potentially change your health outlook completely is internationally known Dr. Radha Gopalan. Dr. Gopalan is a specialist in both Eastern and Western medicine. He's a medical acupuncturist, yoga expert, heart transplant cardiologist, professor of medicine, and an author. Welcome, Dr. Gopalan. Wow, it's really great to sit here with you so that we can discuss health from the Eastern and Western medical perspectives, from health to sickness. What made you decide to practice both extremes of health, from heart transplants to acupuncture, energy medicine?
Good morning, Nicole. Thank you so much. Thank you for this opportunity for me to share some information with you and that wonderful introduction. The very first time I was drawn to having my feet firmly rooted on both sides is when I went to the acupuncture school to learn acupuncture while I was in medical school. So that is one of the fortunate things that happens to me, is that I was learning Western medicine. At the same time, I had an opportunity to have a peek into the Eastern philosophies of medicine. What I learned there is health and disease. While I was learning both at the same time, they are really not opposed to each other. They are synergistic. In other words, it's like light and darkness. The darkness is absence of light. So disease and illness tends to be absence of health. So what does that mean? That means that absence of health doesn't just happen like switching off a light bulb. It is progressive, it is slow, and it happens over time. A lot of people think about living longer without disease, but living longer, and you are an expert in longevity, living longer is not about living longer. It's about, when do you set off that decline? Do you set it off at 30 and live to be 65? Or do you set it off at 65 and live to be 95? So that is the question. Is how early you start and how much you implement. When I learned acupuncture, it just made me realize the health and disease care is something that you need to bring together, and you have to absolutely execute at the same time.
Thank you, Dr. Gopalan. So basically, you are part of what you just explained was that, for our young listeners out there, like, this is the time to start making changes. If we can start being aware of our health, now we can start really impacting our potential outcomes later in life.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. So let's talk about my patient, Liza. She has a strong family history of Alzheimer's, and she is determined to beat it. You often speak about inner being. And what does that mean?
The inner being is who you are. If you look at ourselves on a daily basis, we function in a society and we want to conform to the society, and we behave in a societally acceptable fashion. On the other hand, if you pay attention to what is happening inside your head, there is your inner self, the silent partner, or some people call it your roommate, is constantly having a conversation with you, telling you what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong. And we tend to listen to it. By default, that inner self or that roommate tends to be negative. Why? Because we were brought up in a reward and punishment fashion. And most often, what we get when we grew up as kids and toddlers is punishment, so that we don't do something that harms us. So, what is embedded in that inner self or the inner voice is by default telling you, no, you cannot do that. So that is one of your inner being. So what happens is,
That's kind of like when I one of your books, Second Opinion, 8 Deadly Diseases, when I read this book, it talked a lot about that. I know, within my family, personally, I'm always working on diet. And even so, when it comes to, I feel like weight loss is always a great example. And why do people fall off, their diets? And a lot of times, based on what you're saying, it's like that inner being or that roommate that's telling us, like, oh, it's okay to cheat on your diet and things like that really can derail us from meeting our health goals.
absolutely. So it is no different when it comes to trying to avoid dementia or memory loss. It's the same, no matter what disease you are looking at. Whether it's weight loss, living longer, cardiac disease, others. The process that the human mind goes through is the same algorithmic approach with slight variations. So the inner being is essentially, are you going to be captive to that inner voice? Are you going to free yourself from that inner voice? So that is where the difference of success and failure comes. For example, in my book, Second Opinion, my main philosophy of that book is to be healthy, it's not what you do, it's who you must be. In other words, what you do may not provide success unless your being is aligned with what you do to make it 100% productive.
Okay, so beyond just doing these physical steps, there's more we need to do. We need to go within ourselves. So let's go back to Liza. We can all put ourselves in her shoes. Okay, we have this strong family history of Alzheimer's, and we really want to beat it. But how do we keep our brain from kind of like fixating and going crazy about, constantly thinking about it? Because I think, isn't that kind of like what you're saying, that that's like what you need to gain control of? Like, how do you identify this, and then how do you like slow that inner being, that negative talk?
Yes, so that is a great question. How do you identify? That is the practical tip for a lot of people to be able to recognize um, when does this happen? Because once it happens, you get on it, you get used to it, and then it becomes part of your life. The
It's
first
almost like
thing is
it's almost like when we talk about stress, and we have a lot of entrepreneur listeners out there who deal with a lot of stress in their lives, and sometimes they don't even recognize it. So on some of the other shows, we've talked about how do you recognize those little triggers so that you're not just building up like a tolerance to it, and you're not actually recognizing that your stress levels are rising. And then you recognize it once you've gone beyond that. You've had such a strong change within your body. Now you're starting to develop symptoms, but we want to recognize before we have the change in symptoms. We want to recognize like that little voice within our head or inside us, the roommate, that is slowly influencing us.
absolutely. It is always influencing us. It's always there with us. It's always talking to us. It's always in communication with us. It's how much attention we pay to it, and and learning how to say no, and learning how to align with it. It's not that the silent partner or the roommate is always wrong, but the influence of that silent partner by default tend to be negative. But to your question of how do we recognize this, I mean that the answer to that question hangs on one pivotal answer that one has to ask themselves: am I concerned about Alzheimer's or memory loss developing in me because I have a family history? Or am I, and I want to prevent that by making efforts that are humanly possible by me? Or am I obsessed about making it happen, proving it doesn't happen? And because when you are asking that question, what you're really asking yourself is not whether you're obsessed or not, but are you emotionally invested in it? Because when you're emotionally invested in something like that, you really give it a lot of boost, a lot of drive. When that happens, it's very easy to get lost in overdoing things. And there is a great quote: Everything in life, in moderation, is perfect, but anything too little or too much is not good." It's almost like the yin and yang of acupuncture philosophy, is that they have to be in balance. So that's what you want to ask yourself: am I really obsessed with it and having fear? Am I acting out of fear of this developing in me? Or am I just concerned because I have this knowledge? It happens in my family. I don't want this to happen to me. Let me do something, that whatever I can, to delay it, avoid it, or not even have it. One more thing I just want to point out: just because you have a family history of it, or even if you are genetically predisposed to having a medical problem, that does not necessarily mean you have to manifest that in your life.
Okay, so kind of then going back to the example of the story I heard about the two brothers, the healthy marathon runner and the sedentary. Even though they had this family history of heart disease, the sedentary one didn't have a heart attack. And so I guess that's an example of how powerful like his internal dialogue was and the way how balanced he was internally, that inner being. He was more in touch with it. He may have not even realized that. So kind of talking on, I like that you kind of compared fear versus concern. Now, there's also, I kind of want to go a bit deeper in identifying that inner voice, because then there's sometimes where like you can feel that your body's still like kind of reacting. There's some subtle imbalance, but you're telling yourself, you're like, nope, I'm not fearful. I'm not fearful. But you're still giving rise to it by just saying you're not fearful. You're not like living or manifesting that peace where you're going to overcome these risk factors.
Correct. So you just, as you mentioned it, when this conversation happens in our head, we become the judge and the jury because there are just two voices there. And one of the important things to recognize is it's about time you brought in a third party. So it's very easy. And most of the time we fail because we think we know how to handle it because it's part of us. The inner voice is part of me. And we believe that I can overcome that. But guess what? It's very hard. Well, let me just give you a great example of this inner inhibition and how overcoming is possible by a third party influence. If you go back to the 1950s, in the early 50s and 1940s, running a 4-minute marathon was considered impossible by every runner in the world until I think in the late 1950s in University of Oxford, a medical student on a winter day broke that belief. He ran a marathon, sorry, not marathon, a mile, under 4-minute mile. He ran a mile under 4 minutes for the first time in the history of the world. Guess what happened? Within 3 to 6 months, few other people in Australia and other parts of the world accomplished that when they heard someone else did it. Now, that is the influence of a third party information getting into you as an arbitrator to kind of put things in perspective between the inner self, the inner voice, or your silent partner. I like to call it silent partner because it's silent to everybody else. It's only you only hear it yourself. So it's very important to bring a third party. Like, for example, in the case of Liza or any other audience that are listening to you, a third party would be a practitioner like you, who's able to kind of alert them to this phenomenon of inner self that keeps on going within themselves.
Thank you. I think also just kind of going back to your book, Second Opinion, I really like in this book, it really kind of sheds light. So you talk about the 8 most deadly diseases and you look at it kind of from Eastern, Western perspective, but then you actually exemplify within each of these diseases, like the internal dialogue going on. And so that kind of can help people to then identify within themselves where they might be kind of just ignoring it right now, even though it's going on. So I think that's really, really impactful part of your book. So, if somebody's like, okay, they've recognized they have this issue, right? So if Liza is like realizing like, I think I'm actually like completely fixated on it. Every step I take, every, bite of food, I'm like, is this contributing to Alzheimer's? Every time she, whatever she's doing in her life, she's like, let's say per se, she was like, okay, I realize I'm fixated on it and I need to like unwind this stuff. How does somebody gain control of this like emotional attachment that they want to erase from their life?
Looks like Liza has actually made progress in recognizing that she is attached to it. There is emotion involved in it. So you need to take the emotion out of it. There has to be motivation. Emotions can be a good motivators. Don't get me wrong. Emotions are important, but excessive emotions can actually be detrimental to your progress and success. So you need to have some kind of interest. But Liza looks like she has recognized it. The best way to do that is to do what I call, and I think you're familiar with the term, is called emotional cleanse. In other words, that particular conversation that happened in her is almost like a toxin to herself. So what needs to happen is you need to have an emotional cleanse. Now, how do you accomplish emotional cleanse? You normally I recommend people to go for counseling, which is the third party information you are bringing in, someone objective, someone who is not who doesn't know what your wishes are, what you are thinking, your inner dialogue, inner thinking process, but they can look at the way you're expressing and manifesting yourself and say, "Oh, wait a minute, it really doesn't fit in with what you want. You're doing it too much, you're doing it too little," and then guide you in the middle path where you are able to accomplish your lifestyle changes successfully to reach the goal that you set for yourself.
Great. Thank you for that. Also at Ultra Healthy Human, we have something called an energy scan that's really cool because it's a short test that we can do that actually is able to assess energy imbalances within your body. So for people that are like unsure if they are having an issue, this can actually kind of go within them and identify some of these emotional imbalances.
Well, one of the beautiful things about the energy scan that I've seen you doing it, I've seen it, I've interpreted it. It does something called voice analysis. For example, you and I are right now talking, but there's a lot of the cadence of our voice reflects our emotions right now, but we don't recognize it. But the energy scan does is it's able to pick up the cadence of your voice, and it'll group the predominant emotions that's actually influencing your decision making process and your actions at that point in time. Usually that changes, but it changes over 6 months to a year time. So when you have that, it'll give you a very specific groupings of your emotions that's predominantly affecting your decision making and actions. Now, when you have that in your hand, I don't know if you have gone to any counseling. I have a lot of my clients and patients, I ask them to go for counseling. When you spend about 3 to 4 sessions with your counselor initially, trying to figure out what needs to be addressed, because it takes that much of a time for them to figure out what the root problem you had come to see them with. So you spend a lot of time and money figuring that out. The beauty of this energy scans is just telling you the 4 areas that you need to work on. So you go with that information to the counselor and say, here is the area I want to work on for the next 4 sessions so that I can be successful in what I do outside when I leave here. That's the best part because it becomes very objective at that point.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's that is some very innovative technology, and I love helping people to identify these things because sometimes it's like that little missing piece that when they're trying so hard to be healthy, it's like that one last tweak that they need to really set them off and really be aligned and feeling their best. So this is uh, such an amazing topic. I love discussing with you. I know that you have a lot more information to share because you've had so many years really practicing from both ends of the health spectrum, from health to basically death when you're about to do, a heart transplant for a patient. So, in looking at everything that we've gone over, implementing lifestyle changes plus mindset or addressing that internal being, this is going to give us much more possibility for success in health. So I really love that you were able to share some of this information with us. Can you share with us 3 tips that listeners can start implementing in their life now to recognize that inner being?
Absolutely. That is an important tool to have. And it should be easy to implement as well and to be able to recognize it. That's the 3 things I would recommend anybody who is worried or concerned about any problems, illness, disease that they have family predisposition to or genetic inheritance. They are concerned and worried. They want to make lifestyle changes. It is a good thing to be very proactive. That's number one. It's indisputable. You have to be proactive. The second, as you mentioned in your previous podcast, lifestyle changes are essential. They are one of the cornerstones of being healthy. The third is to recognize your outer self, what you are doing with it, the actions, the lifestyle changes is as important as your inside, that you want to make sure that the inside doesn't jeopardize what you're trying to do and accomplish. So what are the three things you can do to make sure that who you must be is aligned with what you are doing? That's my philosophy on health. It's not what you do, it's who you must be. So there are three things. One of them is just to ask yourself and be mindful of the fact you're going to need mindfulness anyway if you're doing lifestyle changes. So you're already, your audience and anybody who is interested in it is already have become mindful of the problem, one, the fact that they need to take action, two, and they're going to do it. So they are mindful. Just incorporate and ask yourself, are you thinking about it all the time? Are you thinking about it when you go to bed, when you wake up? Is this some of the thoughts that pass across your mind? That's the first one. The second thing, um, when you are doing the lifestyle changes, you become irritable. You are not accomplishing as much as you liked. It's not happening in a very short period of time. I thought this was going to help me, but it doesn't, because you'll be amazed at how many patients come and tell me, I'm tired of this. I want to give up because I can't continue this. It's not giving me anything. So that's the second thing. And the third is you feel anxious when you think about it. This is the hardest thing to figure out, but just watch yourself. When you think about this or your lifestyle changes, are you reaching out for comfort food or comfort actions? Like when you think about, say, for example, let's talk about this for 30 seconds. You're worried about memory loss. As soon as the thought crosses your mind, are you picking up your TV remote and switching on the TV? Now, what that tells you is you want to distract yourself from that thought. That means you're anxious about it. So it's very important to be mindful of those kind of actions where you recognize essentially you are it is influencing you rather than you influencing that thought. So remember, as I said, are you obsessed with it or are you concerned about it? The difference is, are your audience going to allow that thought of not having the disease to influence them, or are they going to take it in their hand, control it, and do whatever is required to accomplish and change it? There's a great quote that says that a man meets his own destiny in the path he took to avoid. In other words, when people are obsessively thinking about not wanting to have something, somehow in the end, they end up meeting that in their life.
Because they're giving just so much attention to that whatever that is, being positive or negative, they're just paying so much attention to it.
You're putting a lot of energy into it, and you're empowering it rather than destabilizing it. You need to realize you are in control.
Thank you. And I really like what you said, the second with the lifestyle changes, because I have patients that say this sometimes, even when if they're, using a supplement to try to, or go at whatever whatever they're doing, whatever intervention they're doing, and they're quick to say, this isn't working. And sometimes they aren't looking at the bigger picture. And they're giving, what are you comparing not working to? It's just not working fast enough because in your mind, you're still fearing whatever that, Alzheimer's or whatever it is. And so people need to be patient and truly align, not just do something, take a physical action and expect a result right away. Just like the progression to disease is very slow. The progression to health, maintaining all these things can also move kind of slow. And you have to really, with your inner being, believe it and live it.
Absolutely. Yeah, disease doesn't happen overnight. It begins its journey weeks, months, and years before it manifests as symptoms.
Yeah, thank you. And I would love to have you on the show again where we can kind of talk about that, the progression from health to disease and how the different types of medicines can kind of play into that Eastern versus Western and how the inner being plays a role in that. So we'll have to look forward to that in the future. But I want to thank everyone for tuning in to this podcast, Ultra Healthy Now. And if you're interested in Dr. Gopalan's books, he has Second Opinion, 8 Deadly Diseases that we discussed. Or his more recent is called Survival. And this kind of is in the light of with everything that went on with COVID and, why kind of goes into what's behind why did some people die that were healthy and we don't understand why they died. And maybe some of the sick people lived through it that we're wondering, well, how did they make it when this other person didn't? Really interesting read as well. Or if you want to connect with him, or if today's episode sparked your interest in achieving your maximum health potential, I invite you to visit us at ultrahealthynow.com, where you can explore some of our specially formulated supplements. You can ask questions. You can suggest topics for the Ultra Healthy Now podcast or schedule a consultation. Join us at Ultra Healthy Human, where your health, beauty, and happiness begins from the inside. Visit ultrahealthynow.com so you can start your transformation today. Thank you again, Dr. Gopalan, for taking the time to share this important health information.
My pleasure.
Thank you for tuning in to the Ultra Healthy Now podcast with Dr. Nicole Srednicki. To discover more, visit ultrahealthynow.com and jumpstart your wellness journey with our 21-day detox program, a total body reset, more energy, better focus, and weight reduction. Our carefully formulated, high-quality supplements will aid in a new level of wellness. Don't wait. Unleash the ultra-healthy human within you. At Ultra Healthy Human, Eastern and Western modalities are combined with cutting-edge technology to guide personalized health programs to help you tap into the limitless potential of your mind and body. Because true health, beauty, and happiness start from within. Remember to subscribe, like, and share this episode wherever you listen to podcasts.
And before we sign off, I want to make it crystal clear that the information presented here is for informational and entertainment purposes only. This episode should not be considered a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. And while we strive to provide accurate and up-to-date information, the content discussed in this podcast is based on general knowledge and research available at the time of recording. Medical knowledge and guidelines can evolve, and what we discussed may not always reflect the most current research or recommendations. If you have specific health concerns or questions, we strongly encourage you to consult with a qualified healthcare professional or medical specialist who can provide personalized advice tailored to your unique circumstances. Every individual's health situation is unique, and what works for one person may not be suitable for another.
This podcast is a presentation of the Rich Dad Media Network.